So, ESWC 2015 in Montreal, Canada has completed. Obviously, Navi, your champions, Cloud9, one of the finalists, however. And so I decided I would do a vlog just talking a bit about what ESWC meant for North America, which basically just means what did we learn, what are the outlook for some of these North American teams going forward. I won't really go into too heavy detail about particular matches and results. It would take me too long to go through every single map of every single team and point out pros and cons of each match. So I will maybe talk about a little bit of like really key turning points in certain games, but there will be other ones that'll just kind of be glossed over to keep this video a decent length. And so I'll just kind of take it team by team, and I may add some kind of just general comments about the event or just, general little tidbits here and there throughout as well. But I'll try to just kind of focus on each team at a time and just kind of talk about their event, what it was like going into it, how it went, and the outlook going forward. So I'll just mention kind of one of these teams really quick, which is the Canadian-only team, which was the Pug Guys, which was picked up by Bereal, a Canadian organization, right before the event. Featured players such as Lawson, that some people may know from the community, Fruit, who I think plays for Mouse Spaz in the NA scene that was like a pro league team, but they didn't do quite well. So I know that those two players were on it, and then I believe it was like Sav, if I'm not mistaken, who's kind of a guy I've seen play around, and then Mario, who is someone I remember from like Keyboard Smashers and things like that. So basically kind of a Canadian mixed team, to be honest, and obviously they got eliminated in group play quite easily, so there's not really much to say about it. I'll just kind of use this point just to make a very general argument, or just kind of like an aside. This is kind of just a random tangent, but I'll try to keep it short, that it just doesn't make sense to have the Canadian only slot like this, like a slot just for Canada. Now don't get me wrong, I get it, like you can still have some USA players on your team and still qualify the Canadian spot. I think you have to have 3 Canadians, if I'm not mistaken. But even then, you'd be very hard-pressed to put together a lineup with 3 Canadians without breaking apart some of the other established teams in the North American region. I just don't think it makes sense to do this. They should just be very general NA slots. Granted, all the other North American teams still wind up getting in due to direct invites because people kept dropping out, and this kind of turned into the Esports North American Cup with 5 North American teams out of 16 teams at the event, which is definitely very heavily skewed, and it shouldn't have been so heavily NA present. It would have been much cooler to see some more international teams here. Granted, I get it. There were a lot of teams who dropped out, like Virtus Pro, like Fnatic, like some of these other teams, TSM. So I can definitely understand that, but I think Dignitas also declined. So I know a lot of teams declined, but I know there were some other international teams out there we could have gotten. Like, it would have been interesting to see Mouse Sports come to this event, just based off of what we saw at the Gfinity event very recently, where they beat VP in a couple of different series. And disclaimer already, I'm dog sitting my friend's dog plus my dog is here, so you're probably going to see them jumping in and out of the room. Just take it as added production value. I'm not going to edit that mess out, and so we'll just kind of let the chaos ensue and see if it makes the video more interesting as we keep recording. But anyway, so yeah, like even if I try to put together an imaginary Canadian team, like you have Shroud at Cloud9, yeah, you have Simphis at Nylum, yeah, Finesse from CLG, and then at that point, you start finding yourself hard-pressed to find Canadians that have any type of international competition experience in CSGO. Maybe Monty, who was like playing for Ace Gaming. You do have like Daps and maybe even XP3 technically, who play for Elevate. But it's really hard to put together a Canadian team, and so I just don't think it's viable. I think it was a waste of a slot. Either just let another North American top team fight for it, from the original USA qualifier or something like that, if you really want another North American team, or it should have been opened up to another national team. But either way, this team doesn't really do anything. I think it was just kind of a waste of a slot, to be honest. But once again, I do understand they were kind of hard-pressed to find teams with teams dropping out and such. So I can see both sides of it, but I definitely think we could have had a better slot there. Next up is going to be CLG, who came to this event. Their first game, they played against Renegades, the former Vox Eminor from Australia, who we knew was a pretty good team. So this was actually going to be an interesting match. They were playing on Cash, which is a pretty good map for CLG. But like I said, we know Renegades is a really good team. In fact, CLG started out really well. They were up 10-5 after the first half here on Cash. Had a really good T-side, actually. And they even started pretty big on the second half as well. I'm not 100% sure what the score was. I maybe like remember this, but I thought that was like 13-5 or something really, really heavy. And then I know a timeout kind of takes place, and then Renegades just starts rolling out, and they make this huge comeback and win 16-13. And so part of it was a choke on CLG's part on the CT side, not closing out the game, but also just some great play from Renegades on the T side. In this particular game, you can't even really point fingers at players because I think everyone on CLG was actually in the 20s in this game. So like all 5 players had at least 20 frags out of the 30 rounds played. So it's a pretty tight frag distribution, and everyone's kind of chipping in. So you can't really call it on a particular player for underperforming or what have you. It's just as a team, as a unit, they just failed to close out the game, even though they had a pretty brilliant T side. And this is kind of the inconsistency factor, this issue closing factor that CLG seems to have at times. We see these crazy highs where they get these cool wins against great teams. This has happened their entire career of 2015, starting with the big LDLC win in X Games Aspen, and fast forward to just recently when they had those best-of-1 wins against Fnatic and Keystars at the ESCA LAN for the Season 1 Pro League there. And then just something happens, like they just, for whatever reason, they can't seem to keep that consistency or to close out a game. Sometimes they struggle to do that. I've seen that happen even when they were playing at the last SIVO event. They had a game against Nylon back when they still had Animatic and Professor Chaos, and they had like this really big lead on Inferno from CT side. They had like this huge game, and then they actually went to overtime. They couldn't close it out on the T side. This is a much different situation. I think it's easier to close on CT side Cash than T side Inferno, but you get my point. Like, I've seen this happen throughout their careers, and it just seems like some type of maybe mental block. I don't really know what it is, but it's just kind of continued inconsistency, continued closing issues. Now, they do wind up taking on Bravado. They win that 16-7 on Dust 2, the South African team. Not much to say there, really. Then they go up against Envy on Cash once again. We know this is a very, very good map for Cash. In fact, like, Envy has been kind of regarded as one of the best teams in the world on Cash, next to like teams like Virtus Pro. Obviously, Fnatic good on the whole pool. We've seen Cloud9 really show themselves to be a very strong Cash team in the international scene, but obviously Envy a big player here. And like I said, this is a map that CLG plays pretty good in the North American scene. And this game, I mean, decently close, 16-10. But here they didn't have nearly as much success on the T side, only getting 4 rounds. Really just suffered to that very high skilled lockdown CT side that Envious can bring, especially on this map as well as maps like Inferno and such. And then they got 6 on CT. Not particularly a bad game given who they were playing against, I guess. They all fragged pretty evenly once again, similar to the Renegade situation, except maybe Hayes, who was a little bit off this time. But yeah, I mean, it's kind of hard to analyze this because now, like in hindsight, we know that Envy is having these roster change things going on, and the team environment's probably awkward, and they're probably not the same Envy that you've been used to seeing. And I'll talk about this maybe a little bit more in relation to Cloud9. But anyway, for this event, CLG doesn't make it out of groups. They're definitely struggling a little bit here. Like, they didn't qualify for the ESCA, or they did, never mind. They didn't qualify for SIVO lane is what I meant. They kind of fell out of that. And they've had some highs and lows. I'm not really sure what's going on. Obviously, we'll see them next, I believe, at the Burbank for the ESL1 Cologne North American qualifiers at the beginning of August, and then we'll just see kind of what goes from there. I don't really know if they've really improved very much, maybe a little bit. They seem really a lot of the same as what I've seen out of this team in the past. So they haven't declined or gone down. And they've continued to still be able to get some impressive results, especially in best of ones against top teams. Though they really like kind of like at Aspen, where they get this big win against LDLC, but they can't beat a North American rival Liquid to get out of groups at that event. And then at this event, ESA won once again impressive results, but they can't beat their North American rivals Cloud9 in that event to move on. So yeah, I think it was just kind of like horribly blown up that they went straight to semifinals off of best of ones with the format of that tournament. I don't think they're a semifinalist team is my point. I think they do have a chance to make it out of groups because they do tend to be able to like prep really hard and like really counter strat and really scout an opponent to win the best of one, especially if they kind of understand how the vetoes are going to go. And kind of understand what map they're actually going to play on, like they were able to do against Fnatic on Mirage at that last event that we saw them at. But yeah, I just don't really know what the outlook of this team is. Like I said, I think they do have some pretty skilled players. Cutler very consistent. Tarek has the potential to be very explosive. JDN's op is one of the top ops in the NA scene when he's on his game. Though there might be some consistency issues there. Um, there's different debates about Finesse's leadership and things like that. Though I think he played, decently well these past couple of weekends. But yeah, it's just hard for me to really figure out what CLG is going to do. Like every time I seem to get excited because they have an impressive result, that they wind up doing something to kind of come right back down. Like they had this pretty decent plateau, and then they had these huge spikes, but they just come straight back down to the plateau rather than continuing to grow or what have you. And so it's just hard to get excited about a situation where the highs and lows are just kind of a crazy mix, right? So that pretty much does it for CLG. I've done some other videos about CLG prior to them going to ESCA land a couple of weeks ago. That talks about the team and this new team and what kind of some pros and cons about it. So you can definitely check that out on my YouTube. But that about wraps it up for them for this video. Now for Luminosity Gaming, this is kind of a crazy situation because they made a roster change right after ESL-ESCA 1 with NAF coming out and Devil Walk coming in. And I actually already did a video about this roster change and about the team's pros and cons there, so you can check that out as well. Didn't really expect much with Devil Walk, only having a few days with the team before the event, to be honest. And it's been announced now that he's going to be the IGL for the team, but at this event, I guess he wasn't yet. He was just kind of playing a support role, and Peter was still calling, which makes sense since they didn't really have a whole lot of time, and now they actually have I guess a couple of weeks before they play at Sevo Land, so that's a couple of weeks they can kind of make this swap and try to make it work. At this event, they didn't really do much. They lost all their group games. They lost to Titan on Dust 2, pretty one-sided, not much to say there. Lost to Navi, pretty one-sided as well on Inferno. Though they actually did have a pretty decent T-side against Navi on Inferno. They had 6 rounds on the T-side there, but they couldn't get anything going on CT side. And then against SK on Cobble, a little bit closer game, 16-11. No, this is actually a game where Pitt does like really well. He dropped 27 in this game, and I have to say Pitt actually looked quite good. Like if you're just looking individually at players, he actually looked pretty good this event. A lot better than what we saw at ESL-ESCA 1, and it was a little bit more reflective of all the play we've seen out of Pitt, like in all the North American League play we've seen between the different online leagues and tournaments that they've played in the past couple of months. And this looked much better for Pitt. And I think this guy can be a really good player for this team. And he actually showed some of that potential, I thought, to a degree in some of these games we watched him play. Peter and Anger also had a pretty decent game against SK as well on Cobble. And those are two guys that this team also really needs a lot out of next to Pitt to be good. Because at this point now, you have Devil Walk being an in-game leader. He's going to be kind of a support role player. You have Lex, who's kind of a lurker support role player. So it really is going to have to be up to Peter, Anger, and Pitt as a trio to really be kind of the heavier fraggers for this team. And I feel like I haven't seen Anger really show up like in frag really good at a LAN since like he played that one event with Complexity at ESCA. So I'd really like to see him get back to that level. We've seen him, we know he can do it. It'd just be great to see if maybe Devil Walk as the in-game leader can figure out a way to get more out of Anger and Peter on a more consistent basis, because that's the keys to success for this team and their outlook. So their outlook to me, I mean, obviously this event didn't go well for them, but they are kind of a new team now with the roster change that just happened. With Devil Walk calling, I think that's great. I mean, we don't have very many good callers in the NA scene, so this North American EU brain drain, kind of like what I talked about in the roster change video I did for LG with, and once again, just kind of referencing kind of a video that Risk made on his YouTube. I think this is cool. You know, I think Devil Walk can help this team tactically. He obviously has a lot of experience with tactics and strategy, being a coach for the best team in the world for quite a long time, and even playing for that team and winning a major with that team as well. So, yeah, I think Devil Walk adds a lot of value here strategically, and hopefully being kind of a coach and player, IGL, you know, all these different roles meshed into one. I think he could help out the team. I think Pitt displayed some pretty good stuff this event. If he can keep that up, that'll be great. So it's just about getting maybe more out of Anger and Peter. And I think this team actually could still be pretty good in the NA scene. They'll definitely be a playoff contender for the next seasons of ESCA and Sevo. Maybe they'll show us a little bit of something at Sevo Land. Maybe they'll be a team, now that they're just playing against North Americans only at this next event. For Burbank, maybe they can, you know, figure something out. I think Cloud9's still a heavy favorite there, but maybe they can at least make it deep in that lane and show us some potential. So we'll just have to see. Now, we're going to move on to Liquid here, who we haven't seen on LAN I guess since they played like one of those Gfinity events, I think it was Gfinity Spring Masters 2, where they had like the one map win against Fnatic and Navi, but then lost all their other games, I think. That's the last time we've seen them at a LAN, so it's been a couple of months, I guess, or at least a month. But I think it's closer to 2 months. Since then we've seen them do some pretty cool stuff in the NA scene. Like they were the team who qualified for this event first, beating Cloud9 in the finals of the ESWC USA qualifier. Though we know there is kind of a footnote there, like that last map on Cash was a very close game where Cloud9 had to use a stand-in, Davey, and so yeah, we know that was kind of close, but they still had some pretty good records. They just missed out due to a tiebreaker on ESL/ESCA LAN, but they qualified for CEVO LAN. They performed well in that league. We've seen them play pretty decent in some of these other tournaments. Like I think they made the finals of the iBuyPower Invitational, but lost to Keed Stars, if I'm not mistaken. So they've actually rivaled Cloud9 pretty well in the NA scene. I think they are the clear number 2 NA team, in my opinion, based on all the performances I've seen so far. So yeah, I mean, they're a good team. Let's see what they can do. Against LDLC White, which I guess is like the better LDLC team between White and Blue, I think. I won't try to act like I really know much about the French scene past like Envy and Titan. So, yeah, I mean, I've heard some good things about them, though, and I know they've gotten some at least kind of cool online results here and there. So they play on Train, and, like, Liquid starts out really, really well. They get 11 rounds in the first half on T-side. They look very solid. And I will say that Train has always been a big map for Liquid since they got this 5 together. I think in the NA scene, they're, like, 8-1 on the map. They've only lost it once, and I think it was to... I want to say it was to Elevate, like in a Face-It match or something like that, but they've beaten Cloud9 on it, like in the ESWC qualifiers, which is like the other big Train team from NA. They just look really good on Train in general in the NA scene, and so they come here, they have a great start. However, in the second half, they kind of let it slip. I mean, they allowed 9 rounds, and it was a couple of mistakes from LDLC White that helped kind of Liquid make sure they could close out this game. They only win at 16-13, even though they had a big 11-round start in the first half. So there's definitely some slip-ups here. Definitely some things to cause for some concern, but they still won. Elige and Nitro and Fugly. I mean, this is the main trio for this team. They all played well. Elige dropped 30, Nitro at 27, Fugly at 22, and these are the 3 main fraggers for this team, and they all performed well. And so this was, good news for Liquid basically to start off. Then they play Nip on Mirage. And first of all, I don't even understand how Mirage makes it through the veto phase here. It just didn't make much sense in a best-of-1 veto type situation. Obviously, in a best-of-3, you only get to veto 1 map before 2 maps are picked, and so it's a little bit more understandable why you would let like a really heavy map slip through. But we know Nip's a good team on pretty much the whole pool, to be honest, and Mirage is definitely one of those maps that they can play really well. Don't get me wrong, it's not like they're considered like the best Mirage team in the world or something along those lines, but they're definitely a team that can play Mirage quite well. And it's definitely a situation we've always kind of seen U.S. teams struggle against international teams on Mirage. And yeah, NIP is one of those teams that can play Mirage pretty well, to be honest. I mean, we have seen them, in fact, beat some really good teams on it. So it's just one of those situations where I don't see how this makes it through. It's not even a big map for Liquid in the NA scene when you look at their records. Though they're not really like a heavy. They don't really have a heavy map besides Train, to be honest. I think Overpass they have a pretty good record on as well. But like even maps like D2 and Cash, which are pretty strong North American maps, they're like 8-5 on Dust 2 and 8-7 on Cash in the NA scene. So they're kind of shaky, like barely over 50% on Cash, even just against North American teams. And then on D2, it's been kind of shaky as well. Like they've had some really big games where they look good on it, but other games they don't. And I know they realize NIP's probably a pretty good D2 team as well, but and maybe NIP kind of ban Train and ban some of these other big maps for Liquid. But still, I'm just surprised Mirage made it through. Either way, they get completely crushed on this. They lose 16-2. They just get 2 rounds in the first half on T side, and that's it. They did lose a lot of like dumb rounds, like where they had 2v1s and things like that post plant, and they would still lose to retakes. So there was definitely some fundamental flaws in how they were playing, just basics that they were lacking on. But in general, they just got crushed, to be honest. So there's really not much to say. However, they go on to beat the Chinese team, which I'm going to pronounce wrong, probably Kiyu. I have no idea. Sorry. And before this game, they had actually beaten LDLC, so that was kind of a cool like result, I guess, for an Asian team in the groups there. They play on Overpass, which has been a pretty solid map for Liquid, and they wound up winning this map 16-6. Once again, the trio, Fugly, Nitro, and Leech all performed really well, each of them at least 20 frags. Fugly was the highest fragger with 25. So once again, you see a lot out of the trio. Of course, they're playing against, I guess, some weaker teams compared to the World's Elite, but still, decent stuff, right? So then they have to play against Cloud9 in the quarterfinals with their North American rival. And kind of sad to see that sometimes, I guess, if you're an NA fan where one of your NA teams is going to go home. But hey, with so many NA teams at this event, and this is actually a cool matchup anyway. It's a 2-0 in favor of Cloud9. We see Overpass played, or excuse me, yeah, I think we see Overpass played and then Inferno. Now, these are Overpass is a map that Cloud9 has been able to beat Liquid on in the past, like an online play and stuff. One example being the ESWC qualifiers, where they won map 2 in a pretty one-sided fashion on Overpass in that series, because it was like Liquid who had one train, then it was Overpass that Cloud9 went to the last map's cash, and like I said, Cloud9 used to stand in, and it was a big mess basically. But here in this game, they lose 11-16 on Overpass. Honestly, just no real T side to go on. They had 9-6 half on the CT side in the first half for Liquid, which isn't a bad CT side. It's still respectable. It's not maybe as much as you want. Maybe you want kind of 10 or something like that, but 9's not bad. But they just didn't have anything going on T side. Once again in this game, Alicia Fugly still doing pretty well for the team, but Nitro is off a little bit. But no one really did particularly bad individually. Like, you can't really pin like one player once again. But yeah, they just didn't really have a T side to speak of. That's really the honest truth, and that's what kind of lost it for them. Then on Inferno, we actually have a pretty close game here, 16-14. Though I would say like C9 just kind of struggled to close this game much more than like Liquid just playing really well. I mean, C9 starts off in the first half with the 10-5 CT side, and then over on the T side, we see Liquid kind of start to come back into this game on this GC side. They wound up getting 9 rounds, obviously, to make it 16-14. It was just kind of Cloud9 struggling to punch in those final T rounds to win the game, though we know this is a CT-sided map, and it was a close game. I would say that Nitro and Elige actually struggled a bit this game. It was actually a Dren who really stepped up. I think he top fragged here. And Fugly, once again, he was super consistent throughout this tournament. I think he dropped pretty much 20 frags every map he played, if not more. So, I mean, super consistent play out of Fugly. Really good to see that out of him individually for, like, a future outlook. We definitely saw some big moments out of Elige in the group play, against the Chinese team, KU and LDLC White. And he even played pretty decent on Overpass against Cloud9. But on Inferno, Nitro and Elite struggled a little bit. And those are two guys you really need from Liquid if you want to, put up W's on the board. But overall, I think the outlook's still pretty good here for Liquid. I mean, they lost to Cloud9, who has proven themselves to be a top 8 team in the world right now. They've made the last 2 finals of the last 2 lands they attended. They are the top NA team. There's no doubt now, I think, between beating CLG head-to-head on LAN a weekend ago at ESL event, and then beating Liquid head-to-head here at this event. Both instances were 2-0s. So yeah, I mean, I think Cloud9's the clear-cut number 1 in NA, and there has some pretty good international results now. But I think Liquid still pretty decent outlook. Like, they were still having some pretty good play out of some of their stronger players, but sort of getting absolutely wiped by NIP, which is a problem. Like, you need to at least put up a better fight, I guess. They still looked okay this event. They just lost to their NA rivals who went on to go to the finals. So I don't think you can be too upset if you're Liquid here. I guess it would have been nice if they could have upset Cloud9 and moved on to the semis, but it is what it is. I think their outlook's still pretty good. I can't really see them making any roster changes, or I think they're fine the way they are. I mean, the only way that they would ever really make one is if they could get like a superstar to come in, like a Hiko or something like that, to take the lurking role for the team. But otherwise, I think they're pretty well grounded, and we're going to see them again here in just another weekend at DreamHack Valencia. So let's see how that goes. And of course, they have Civo Land, and right after that, they have the NA qualifiers for SO1 Cologne. So we're going to get to see them in 3 lands back to back, basically, over the next 3 weeks. And I think we'll learn a lot more about Liquid at that point, and then we can kind of start making some bigger assessments. But I think for now, it's okay. Now let's move on to Cloud9, which is obviously the final piece of this video, short of maybe some general comments. So I won't go too much into their group play. They in groups they beat Baril and Keatstars quite convincingly. There's really not much to say there. Beating Keatstar 16-6 on Overpass was actually quite cool though, because that is kind of been a map that the Keatstars have shown a lot of promise on in the NA scene and some of their league play for ESL ESCA. So it's cool to see like a really dominant victory there from Cloud9 on the map. And then they beat Flipside as well, so they won all three of their group games. So I guess the game against Flipside was actually a bit tough on Cash, 16-10. They got 7 rounds on CT side, but they got 9 on T, so a really strong T side there from Cloud9. Ska and Nothing both almost shot 30 bombs in this game. Shroud and Freak still very in the high teens, though. So basically they got a lot of production out of all 4 of their fraggers and perhaps their toughest group stage game. So, good showing here in the groups for Cloud9. They won all their games. What can you say? Now, we already talked about the head-to-head game against Liquid from Liquid's perspective, so I don't really comment too much on this here, other than, everyone played pretty well. They beat the NA rivals, and so now they've kind of established themselves as the top NA team with this series, basically. So now let's move on to the semifinals match where they play against Envious. So obviously, we've seen them play Envious a lot lately. We saw them play at ESL ESCA. They beat them twice on Cash. And I think once on Dust 2, so they had like the 3-0 from that event between that best of 3 in the semis there, and I guess that was a quarterfinals match actually at ESL ESCA, and then they beat them one map at least at the summer event for Gfinity once again on Cash, and they had beaten them. No, excuse me, they beat them on Train at the last Gfinity event in group play, though they wound up losing a close game on Cash and got completely wiped on Inferno. So they've had a pretty big head-to-head history here, and I think Envy kind of leads in maps 4-3 with these 5 going into this event. Going into this event, it's like that. So once again, they're going to play Train and Cobble, and once again, it's going to be Cloud9 who wins. 16-8 on Train, very dominant victory there. And then Cobble, nail-biter, overtime, 19-17 win. Nothing, just playing a really good tournament here. He dropped 33 in the Cobble game. Ska and Shroud also near 30. Freakazoid 24. So once again, in these games we're seeing production out of all 4 of the key fraggers of the team. I mean, I think the trio of Nothing, Scooter, Shroud's like the most important piece, with Freakazoid obviously right next there to be kind of that 4th guy, or maybe even fill the gap if one of the trio isn't playing well, which has happened at times as well. Now, obviously, in hindsight, people will look at this a bit differently because of, the Envy roster issues and things of that nature. But I think that they're still a strong team with a lot of skilled players, and I think it's still a good victory for Cloud9. And even if this isn't necessarily counted as an important victory because of the right situation, Envy obviously beating them last weekend in a best of 3 and a best of 1 before we even knew about all these roster problems. It still shows a good result that they beat a really top team in the CS world, right? And now I'm somewhat afraid that people will kind of start trying to discredit wins that they've gotten against Envious at Gfinity Summer on that one map on Train, and then beating them in a best of 1 and a best of 3 at ESL ESCA. If people start discrediting that, thinking back and now in hindsight with what they know about Envy now, which I think is a bit unfair. Maybe for this event you could make a strong argument that it helped, but I think at ESL, ESCA, maybe they didn't play as well as you're used to seeing, but they're still Envy, a team with really skilled players, one of the best teams in the world, top 5 going into this event, and so I hope that doesn't happen. But yeah, this is another good result for Cloud9. I think they have to be proud of it, despite the situation. Sure, it factors in, and for this particular event, maybe it does have a huge weight, but previous wins against Envy, I think you just have to give Cloud9 full credit for. I think it's dangerous to kind of go back now and start digging that back up again and reassessing it. Maybe a little bit, but you still shouldn't take away from Cloud9 is my point on that. So let's focus here on the finals, which is, I guess, the most important part of this, right? As far as assessing Cloud9's outlook. So coming into this event, Navi had 1 star ladder in EPL earlier this year, so 2 titles already. They also had made the finals in the last 3 lands they had played, and they've been top 4 for quite some time now as far as results go, over the past few months. So they've looked quite good. right? And I know there a case was made by Lurpus, for example, that Navi was actually the favorites to win this event, which made sense because the teams that were ranked above them, like if you were making a top 10, like Fnatic, like TSM, like Virtus Pro, none of those teams were there. And like they've actually had a pretty good track record against NIP head to head. NIP's always kind of struggled with CIS teams, it seems like, throughout their entire careers. So yeah, I mean, Navi was kind of the favorite coming in, and they made it to the finals. So this was kind of expected. When you look at the map pool for the actual finals, it was first map Inferno, second map Overpass, or second map Dust 2, and the final map was Overpass. This is the biggest criticism I've heard on social media and everywhere I've looked is like, oh, why does Cloud9 let Inferno through? This is such a huge mistake. They always do so poorly. And like we're thinking back to like mid 2014 to today, where Cloud9's international results against international results on Inferno have not been quite good. That's very true. However, let me just try to add a little bit of context to this for those of you who don't know. So you're only allowed one ban in the best of 3 series, and obviously like Mirage is the ban to make here. And I made this point on Twitter, like Anders and Similar even cited it in their cast, which I really appreciate, by the way, that it's like pick your poison, because Navi is very good on Inferno. I think they have like a 12-5 record on LAN this year on Inferno, but they also have like a 10-4 record on Mirage. And if you're Cloud9, what map are you more comfortable with? Because it's like, no matter what, you're kind of screwing yourself because Navi's so good on both of these maps on LAN, right? So it's really hard here. You only get to get rid of one, so you kind of have to let one bullet come through and hit you, basically, right? And I'll say this as well about Cloud9's Inferno, is that they've actually really improved their CT side on the map, which you kind of saw a hint of this against Liquid in the quarterfinals of this event. And honestly, the other times they've really played Inferno, like in this instance against Navi, or when they played Envious as well at ESCA, or excuse me, no, that was Gfinity Summer 1, my mistake. Both those times, they didn't even really get to play CT side, to be fair, when they got crushed. Their T side was just so poor, and they were playing against really good CT teams on Inferno, that they didn't even get a chance to play their CT side, which has been much improved. And I know I'm kind of basing this mostly off of what I've seen in the NA scene play, but you have to understand that they even struggled to play a good CT side in the NA scene not too long ago. I mean, it wasn't so long ago when they were losing to like Luminosity Gaming in a huge fashion in a CEVO match because they had no CT side to speak of. They got like 3 rounds first had CT side against LG on a game, and you could still see them struggling, but then they really turned it around. They made Inferno like their best map in the NA scene, as far as record goes at least. I mean, they might argue that like maps like Train and Cash and even Overpass were like stronger maps for them in the NA scene, but their record on Inferno was quite good, and it was because they were getting these monster CT sides all of a sudden on the map. I mean, Shroud anchoring that pit, being this like A anchor that's just so powerful. Scudo's op, moving that around, being so powerful. Nothing actually has, looked quite good playing kind of that arch rotator position on CT side. And maybe there's been some instances where like Sean and Freak have had some troubles on the B side of the map. But in general, they really did step that map up. So I think they had a better chance actually on Inferno had they been able to get something going on T and play their CT side properly. That they still had a better chance doing that than beating Navi on Mirage. A map they don't play, they ban all the time. Now, yeah, in hindsight, we're looking back and they kind of have to pick one of these maps to improve, but I don't think people should be so critical on letting Inferno through as opposed to letting Mirage through. So I think it would have been just as bad, if not worse, if they would have let Mirage through. Could be wrong, maybe who knows, but I think the decision actually made sense. And obviously, I'm sure Cash was banned by Navi, so that can't be used by them. So they go with kind of their next best option, since Navi is still also a pretty good trained team, which is playing D2, a map that I guess that's actually one of the worst records Navi have on LAN for this year. They're like 4-5 on the map, though that is kind of misleading because their losses are to teams like Envy and Fnatic in really close games. So yeah, I mean, it was going to be tough. Like the map pools are pretty well synced as far as like the teams and the maps they like, and then Navi being so good on the teams on the maps that Cloud9 like to play, with the exception of Mirage. So yeah, it was a tough situation with the map veto. But on Inferno, Cloud9 just gets blasted. They can't do anything on T. I've already kind of alluded to this, and all of Navi played really well. You got Flamey and C's locking down B. You got Guardians op usually positioned at mid. I mean, they were just locking everything down. Where do you go, basically? And Navi played really well. Cloud9 couldn't get anything going, and that's pretty much the map. Now on Dust 2, Cloud9 wins this 16-14 fashion. They actually struggle a lot in the first half here on T side because they only get 5 rounds on T, so it's looking pretty bad. But then they had like this really big pistol round in the second half, and like they've even said in interviews, it's kind of sparked some life in them, so to speak. And then they get towards the end here. They're making the comeback, but there were some very close rounds. They're actually having some struggles kind of closing out some rounds, and we were seeing flashbacks to what happened against Fnatic on Dust 2 at the finals of ESL-ESCA. And, like, but they eventually grab it. You know, like, Freakazoid has some big plays from Goose, for instance. Nothing's playing out of his mind. Skadoodle's playing big with the op. I mean, Shroud had some big plays as well. I mean, everyone's making plays. All 4 C9's fraggers in the 20s. Again, very good sign whenever Cloud9 can have this type of production out of their key players. And so they take the map. You know, well done, though they did have some struggles there at the end, but they got it done. That's what matters. So then we move on to Overpass, right? And once again, 16-14 game for Na'Vi this time. A heartbreaker. C9 actually have a really good T side. They go up 7-1 to begin with, and I guess maybe you'd hope for a little bit more out of them on T side since they had such a big start, but they only get one more round, and they win the half 8-7. But still, if you don't think about it that way, if you just look at it on paper, that's still a very good T side. Now on CT side, just some big heartbreakers take place. Like round 29, they have an eco round where they actually, like, Shroud opens up with 2 P250 kills from barrels onto Long B or Monster, whatever you want to call it, and they actually, like, look like they might convert this and win, but then, like, Sean loses a 1v1 at the very end, just a heartbreaker basically. Then round number 30, the final round of the game, you actually have Sean make a big play at Long A, getting a couple of kills until the rotation comes in. But then, like, all of a sudden, Na'Vi from, like, the parks and bathrooms just kind of completely eradicate that rotation, and Sean gets caught, and then Shroud gets put in, like, a 1v2 and just can't win it, and that's the game. So very, very heartbreaking stuff. Very, very close game. Once again, nothing plays out of his mind here. He drops 31. Freak at 18. Ska and Shroud actually do kind of struggle this map. I won't lie. They were both at 13. So they really did kind of struggle to be like the star players we're used to seeing out of them, especially from Skadoodle, who's been, like, good throughout this entire tournament. And even Shroud's been pretty damn good throughout this entire tournament. But here, on this particular map, when they needed it most, they did kind of struggle a little bit. But then, again, Na'Vi just played really, really well. And some of these rounds were still quite close, you know, even with those two struggling. And, I mean, they only lost 16-14 even when 2 of their stars aren't playing well. So I think that bodes well for the depth of skill of Cloud9, I guess you could say, that even when 2 of your brightest stars, Ska and Shroud, like, I guess most people consider that to be their 2 main stars, you know, aren't performing. Nothing's able to step up and fill the void, and Freak's making some big plays, and they're still, you know, edging out the game 16-14 against, you know, a top 3 team in the world. So that actually kind of speaks a lot to, I guess, the amount of talent Cloud9 has overall for the people to be able to step up like that. So what's their outlook going forward then? First of all, I want to point out that many of the things I'll say for this outlook are things I've already said in previous videos about Cloud9. When I did, like, Cloud9's Long Road or something like that. It's a video you can check out on my YouTube, and it just talks about their outlook. First of all, Nothing's form has been excellent. I've said this time and time again in some of my past vlogs and tweets and things like that. You know, ever since this particular 5 got together, his form has been so damn good. He's had some highs and lows throughout his CSGO career at different times, but this is the longest standing amount of time I've seen his form be just excellent. I know most people are just pointing to this Overpass game where he played out of his mind. That was, like, the best map they'd seen him play in a long time, and that may be true, but if you reflect back throughout this entire tournament, I mean, Nothing was even playing, you know, pretty well against the same team on Dust 2, just the map before. We're using the 20s. You look whenever he's playing against Envy, you know, on Kabul in that game, he was the top fragger there as well. You look back to their play against Liquid, you know, he's playing really well there. In the group play, he drops almost drops the 30 bomb against Flipside on that cash game. You reflect back to, you know, ESL, ESCA 1, he's playing well throughout that event as well. So, I mean, I think his form has actually been quite good, though it may have just been, like, really noticed because it was, like, really excellent in this particular map on Overpass against Na'Vi. But I think overall his form has just been good for a while now, like ever since Gfinity Summer 1 at least, and then all the North American League play, which is something he would sometimes struggle with as well. Like, his stats have been higher than they've ever been in North American League play for CSGO. So, yeah, I mean, he's just really hit the highest point of his CSGO career, and it's been lasting much longer than some of his other high points. And this is good news for Cloud9. And I think it's because all the other, nothing used to always just be, I don't know how to really describe it. Like, he'd be really comfortable doing one thing at one point, and then he would kind of like want to switch it up and do something else. Maybe he wasn't as comfortable. It's almost like he couldn't find just like a dedicated role or spot on a map, so to speak, where he would just like, this is what I'm going to play. I'm super comfortable. Like, things would kind of shift and change, the ebb and flow of like moving players around and trying to make adjustments and such. And it seemed like, you know, people would keep swapping roles. Like, nothing used to be an entry fragger, then he went to more of a lurking role at times, kind of like he is now. He's kind of been more of a lurking role a lot of times because like Sean and Nothing are kind of like the two lurkers on the team now. But my point I would make here is that because they had such well-defined roles with Sean being kind of a lurker, and obviously the in-game leadership has been so much better, or so much more clear and well-defined, and he is the leader now. There's no more like dichotomy of kind of two callers on the team. Like, he is the key leader, so that role is really well solidified. The opping role is really well solidified with Skadoodle, though I guess that process had already begun with Shazam, like really solidifying an opping role, something the team didn't have for a very long time. Obviously, you know, Freakazoid coming in, really being that dedicated entry fragger. Shroud being able to be more aggressive on the T sides, getting more production out of him there in that regard. Because all the other roles are so well defined, Nothing is able to kind of float around, kind of be that wild card. Yeah, he does lurk quite a lot, but sometimes he will take point. So I think the fact that everyone else is so locked in, it allows him to have that freedom to be that wild card. I think that that's what's made him so much more comfortable, and he obviously has just been performing well ever since then. That may not be the only reason. I think that kind of contributes, and he's played well. Obviously, Skadoodle, top opper in an A. He's giving you production pretty much every single game. Maybe short of this overpass map against Na'Vi, and then obviously they all just kind of got crushed on Inferno against Na'Vi. But other than that, played well throughout the entire event. He's so damn good. I mean, he's one of the best oppers in the world at this point, I think you could say. Obviously, Guardian's still probably number one. Kenny S gets back on form. Yeah, he's definitely going to be up there. There's all kinds of oppers I can still throw in, like Simple, like JW, like some of these other guys, Alu from NIP. But, I mean, just watching Skadoodle play, the kills he gets, the plays that he makes, he's one of the top oppers out there for sure. So, looks good. Once again, Shroud, you know, had a couple of games where he looked rough, but overall played pretty well. Like I said, he's getting a lot more production out of him thanks to, like, how Sean's calling from the T side. He's a lot more active and executes. He's able to put that aim to use on the T side a lot more. On CT sides, he can still be that anchor for you on certain maps, but also a pretty good rotator. He's putting up good numbers. I mean, you can't knock him. He's definitely like one of the big names on this team. So yeah, great stuff there as well. So that's kind of your trio, and they're all performing pretty well overall. Yeah, sometimes they may have off maps, but even when they have off maps, they're still playing teams close, and they're losing in close fashions for the most part. So yeah, I mean, good stuff, right? Outlook looks good there. Freakazoid, you know, we saw him make some huge plays against, you know, Envious and even Fnatic at times. Last LAN, this LAN, that carries over. So it seems like the troubles he had to be able to be productive in the past, like at some of these Gfinity events, he's really kind of found his form, really kind of found his spot, and he looks a lot more comfortable. You can owe that to Sean a bit to kind of put him in better spots, but also just his play has been better. And so I would just say, like, maybe you're not gonna see him like explode and be a star every single game, but there's been plenty of games where he's been right up there with the other three of the trio, or even instances like against Na'Vi in the finals when some of the guys weren't performing as well. He was kind of filling that gap. So yeah, I think he still has an important place on this team, just being that entry fragger. Even if his stats aren't good, that alone helps out so much on establishing everyone else, that he can just take that role and just play it. And we've seen many people allude to this, many analysts like Thor and like all these other guys have alluded to the fact that it's very hard to find an entry fragger who will just be an entry fragger every single round, no matter how things are going, no matter how suicidal it may seem the play that you're being asked to do. And just the fact alone that he does that is going to make him vital to this team going forward for, I mean, like the foreseeable future, I guess I would say. But the fact that he's also been able to come in on the fragging department and make plays and get more comfortable, I mean, Cloud9 looks good. You know, they made it to the finals the last two events they've played. They're getting past tough teams like Envy. They're playing really good teams like Na'Vi and Fnatic close and even getting maps off of them. I think they really are in a good spot right now. And unfortunately, they can't really like practice and like fix some of these mistakes because they still have 4 more lands to go, basically back to back to back. But yeah, I mean, I think that the outlook's still good. They're getting, a lot done here. They're moving up the ranks, so to speak. And so, yeah, the outlook looks bright, I think. And you got to be happy with this, though it was a heartbreaking loss to Navi in the finals. But everything else is looking good for them so far. So that's pretty much it. I kind of talked through all the teams. I'll just make one general thought here, though. I know there's been a lot of complaints and criticisms about ESWC this year, and obviously a lot of it is well-founded, with delays and all these other issues. But I will say that it goes a bit too far, people saying they should never run an event again. But let's see if they can, take these criticisms and fix them next time around. And I'll just kind of leave it at that, as this video is already probably quite long. But thanks a lot for tuning in. Hope you enjoy it. Follow and subscribe for more, and catch you next time with some more content.